Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to the OT is In with me, your host, Sarah Collins. In today's episode, we're thrilled to be joined by Kelli Fetter, an occupational therapist and founder of Handwriting Solutions. Kelli brings a wealth of expertise from her extensive background in outpatient pediatrics, early intervention, and the school system, all while sharing the personal journey that led her to specialize in handwriting, reading, and spelling interventions. We'll delve into the interconnectedness of reading and writing skills, the importance of fine motor development from early childhood, and practical tips for parents, especially those homeschooling, to foster these essential life skills. We'll also explore the misconceptions about handwriting, development, and the critical role it plays beyond basic literacy. So join us as we discuss research, developmental milestones, and Kelli's hands-on strategies to help children thrive. Stick around, this episode is packed with insights and actionable advice that you will not want to miss. One of the top reasons that parents reach out to me at Homeschool OT is, help me, help my child with handwriting, or my child is struggling with handwriting and so many people are just telling me to forget it. It's not even necessary. What do I do? We've touched on this in several times on the OT is In podcast. Episodes 5 through 8 discuss the impact of vision on handwriting. Episodes 21 through 24 discuss general strength in handwriting. And now episodes 37 through 39 are talking about the fine motor skills needed for handwriting. And there will be more series on this in the future. But if you, a homeschooling parent, are looking for ways to improve your child's handwriting and can't wait for these future episodes to touch on the topics that pertain specifically to you, look no further than the Handwriting Focus Group. Each week for 4 weeks, there are new videos and written information on the underlying skills needed for handwriting, information on dysgraphia, curriculums and products to support the actual act of handwriting, and low-tech as well as high-tech assistive technology to support your child's success. Now, I say over 4 weeks, but you do have lifetime access because I totally recognize the busyness of homeschool parents and parents in general. So visit homeschoolot.com today and learn more about the ways to join our Handwriting Focus Group, or visit more specifically homeschoolot.com/handwriting-focus-group. Let's make handwriting fun, easy, and effective together. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. Today I have my friend Kelli Fetter with us, and she runs a group called Handwriting Solutions. And we have actually done quite a few things together. Kelli is in the Handwriting Focus Group, talking about assistive technology. We have talked some together about camps and just all kinds of different things because I really respect what she does. So Kelli, can you go ahead first and just start with, who are you and how did you get to where you are, where you're working on handwriting so frequently?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me first. And I
Absolutely.
thoroughly enjoyed all of our work together and hope that we can continue to work together in the future. So a little bit about myself. I, like you, am an occupational therapist. That's my training. I worked in outpatient pediatrics for many years. I worked in earlier intervention, school systems, really saw a broad range of ages and diagnoses and such. And then I also taught adjunct at an OT assistant program. But really, what led me to Handwriting Solutions and to taking this path is a very personal story with my daughter. So, when she was in kindergarten, I started seeing some signs, and I had that OT brain, but I wasn't really as familiar with the education piece. But I just saw so many red flags. And from that, she ended up first grade getting a dyslexia and dysgraphia diagnoses. I was able to find so many resources for the dyslexia and the reading piece. But my goodness, there was nothing out for the dysgraphia and handwriting.
Can I have you pause here for 1 second? Because I
Sure.
have so many families that are like, how do you go about getting a diagnosis? So, how did you even go about that pathway?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at that time, we were in a private school. So going through the school wasn't really an option because they didn't have that resource. So we sought that out outside of school. Some options would be a neuropsychologist, an educational psychologist, depending on your state, even just someone with an educational doctorate degree or some licensure varies state by state, but really finding that expert. And that's what I sought out because even not all professionals who give diagnoses are
Mhm.
really experts in this learning disability field. And I've learned that very quickly with working with students as well. Finding that person who is familiar with that is really the best starting point. And then, as well as if you are in the public school system, they can sometimes be a great resource for that too. But again, there are limitations as well. And then, if you're in that homeschool setting too, you obviously can leverage both outside
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
public systems. So really, once she got that diagnosis, and actually we started remediation before because
Mhm.
who cares if there is a
Right.
diagnosis?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I knew there was something going on.
Yeah.
But I saw this gap, this who is helping this kid? Sure, as an occupational therapist, there are areas of handwriting that we address, but I just felt like nobody was really hitting it at this angle
Mhm.
and understanding that dysgraphia piece, etc. Handwriting Solutions was born. I took my personal experience, my professional experience. I took as many trainings and courses and read everything that's out there and soaked in all the information. And to be honest, there's really not a ton of research, dysgraphia. So, and really just built the programming and based on that. And then it's grown and pivoted and changed. And now we serve students in reading and spelling as well, because oftentimes if they're struggling with
They
handwriting,
go
they will have
together.
those struggles too. So we have a whole team of tutors who are now doing that as well. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my journey. It continues to evolve and change as we grow, though, because really I come at this from a passion. It is my passion to help these students because these are the students that are slipping through the cracks. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And there is an episode 33 where we talked all about dyslexia too. So this is our counter component to, not counter component, but our other component, I don't know, to where you were saying a lot of these things, they coincide, right? Where you've got spelling and handwriting and reading and how there are pieces that all fit together. And in past episodes here, we've also talked about other aspects of handwriting. We talked about vision in episodes 5 through 9, primitive reflexes, which also plays into handwriting in episodes 21 and 22, and then core strength in episodes 23 and 24. So if you haven't listened to those as well, there is so a plethora of information on handwriting here. But this time, Kelli and I are going to focus in a little bit more on fine motor control. And the reason being is that there is not a day that goes by when I do not see, and Kelli, you can chime in on this too, but posts on in different homeschooling groups and in different education groups, things like that, where parents are like, my kid is really struggling with handwriting. And the very first thing that people go to is, oh, play with putty or build with Play-Doh or something. And yes, that can touch on one aspect, the fine motor control, but it doesn't address all those other issues. So when you are really trying to think and find out if the fine motor control is the issue or is the place to start, how do you, Kelli, go about working and talking through to families about discovering what is that underlying issue?
Yeah, so handwriting there are so many skills. It is a
Mhm.
complex skill. And I always tell families, because I'm a visual learner, that I think of handwriting and that written output as the tip of the iceberg. And so
Yeah.
we have to really zoom in and dig deeper and figure out where those lagging skills lie. And as you said, sometimes it's core stability and proximal stability. Sometimes it is fine motor. Sometimes it's visual. There's so many pieces and parts to handwriting that we have to really figure out, as well as so you're building those foundations. That's what I
Mhm.
like to call those foundational skills. But then you're also coming at it from that top-down approach too, because we can build strength via putty all day long, but we also have to explicitly instruct in handwriting and all of this too. And I think that is to your point of, yeah, Play-Doh is great. Putty is great.
Mhm.
All strengthening your hands is wonderful. And we will talk a lot about that later and how to do that. But it's really all of it. It's
Yeah.
all of these pieces and how they come together and figuring out where that missing link is. Fine motor, of course, plays a huge piece in it. I am always looking at how the student is holding the pencil, not so much to be so particular about the grasp, but just what is happening. Let me see
Mhm.
what's happening at their shoulder, at their wrist, at their fingers. How are they moving the pencil? How are they controlling the pencil? Are they pushing really hard or not hard enough? Are they overshooting or undershooting? Is it smooth or is it jerky movements? There's so many things that we can tell just by that little snippet of observation of how they're moving their hand with writing. And that can give us so much information about what's going on. And so when you're taking that approach of, okay, the end goal is written
Just
output.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But then let's figure out how we can get there, fine motor being one of those huge components for sure.
So you talked a little bit about grasp patterns, and I actually laughed because I didn't know that my grasp pattern was wrong until I went to OT school. But now when I
Happens a
look
lot.
at it, I'm like, oh, I'll put a picture of it in the show notes so you guys can see how I write because it is not what one would call typical or functional, even although it clearly is functional because I write. So, what is the development of grasp and how would you say or define what a functional grasp is?
Yeah, so when we think about development, I always like to picture that baby, that little baby that has no motor control at this point, and
Right?
they are just learning their body and they're starting by batting at a toy. And therefore, there's no fine motor going on there.
Right.
It's all gross motor that's coming from their little core and their little shoulders. But as they crawl and they're learning to manipulate toys and this, they start out with this very gross grasp. So when we're looking at our preschoolers, that's probably what they're starting at. They're using their whole hand, their fist, so to say, because they don't have those isolation, finger isolation and coordination and all of that developed yet. And that's fine. They shouldn't.
Mhm.
So what we like to see then is that movement from these gross grasps or fisted grasps to a more refined movement. And so you might see that work from the palm to the fingertips, but we're still using all of our fingers because that gives us a little bit more stability, all the way to being able to really just isolate those three fingers with two fingers and thumb. And again, that's our quote ideal functional
Mhm.
grasp, the dynamic tripod grasp. It is the most functional because you do have that good stability at your wrist, your shoulder, and then you've got that mobility of the fingers. Like you said, though, there are also plenty other functional grasps, and my
Mhm.
daughter has one of those grasps that is hilarious. I always crack up because I'm like, yeah, I literally do handwriting tutoring and my daughter's grasp is atrocious.
See, I am an OT and my writing, my grasp, according to the pictures in the book, would also be atrocious.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also one of those things where number one, I know she can achieve a modified tripod grasp. She just is not confident or comfortable with that yet.
Mhm.
Number two, her writing is functional. It is legible. It is not causing her any discomfort at this time,
Yeah, I
although I
think
have
that's
warned her
key.
that it eventually will. And so it's that balance too. I always laugh too, throwing in a Swifty moment here, but take a look at Taylor Swift's pencil grasp. You can just Google it. It is not your typical grasp, but is it functional? Is it
That's so
legible?
funny.
It's
How did you even see a picture of
no.
Taylor Swift's?
I need to share this more often. This is good. So good. Taylor Swift content. Again, you've got this progression from gross motor, so those big movements to smaller movements. But we also know that, again, it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's functional. Something that we're seeing a lot more lately are these students who are just having a hard time in general with grasping.
Anything.
And we can talk a lot about the why that is it we're not getting outside and playing enough and developing those muscles. We're spending a little bit too much time on screens and those two-dimensional play experiences. But I see it. I'm sure you probably see it
Yes.
as
Mm-hmm.
well. Some parents have even said, they've used the term, my kids' hands are soft. And I think that's such an interesting
Yeah,
description.
that isn't interesting, but I can see that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes sense because those fine motor muscles in our hands are just not being developed like they used to be, which is also a great red flag if you're your kiddo, because that plays into grasp.
So, what are some of your top fine motor activities that you would encourage for families? If they're saying my kids' hands are soft, where do you start with that?
Yeah, I think you've hit on it before. The core stability, the gross motor,
Mhm.
all of those skills, absolutely. While we're doing that, we're also building up some intrinsic strength. So again, I like the putty and the Play-Doh. I think that's great. I think that's a lost art for sure.
Mhm.
I ask so many kids, do you have Play-Doh in your house? And they're like, no. And I'm like, guess what? Here you go. You're
Take it home.
exactly. I love any sort of pushing or pulling. Thinking like the monkey bars or pulling
Yes.
wagons or something like that, where you're really having to stimulate those intrinsic muscles in the hand. And then I like more refined type activities, clothespins, any sort of pinching like tongs or chopsticks. And then I love games. Who doesn't love games? The light bright is one of my favorite. Those little,
Light was my favorite when I was little.
it's so fun. Like every time I break that out or I recommend that to a family, they're like $5 now too, by
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
Um,
So good.
and they're so great because it literally forces that
Hmm.
kiddo to pinch that tiny little object with the correct fingers.
Hmm.
And again, you'll see very clearly if that's a challenge for that kid or not. Hi
I
ho,
love
Cherry.
those sticker paint by numbers too that are stickered because it's that pinch off the sticker and then put it down, find where it is. It adds in all those components of the visual scanning, that we talked about that plays into it as well. But then, yeah, just that little pinch. And it's so fun to make this giant picture of your bird or whatever with these stickers. It's so great.
Yeah, I love stickers. And again, yeah, motivating because that's the key,
Hmm.
right? Is to really figure out what's going to motivate this child to want to engage. Hi Ho Cheerio is another one of my favorites. Stringing beads.
Yeah.
Again, not to refer back to Taylor Swift, but who doesn't like to do that too?
Right?
Let's string some beads and make some bracelets. And so you have a nice activity out of it, but stringing beads also isolates those same fingers. And then honestly, one of my favorite things that this is another lost art, coloring. Let's bring
Hmm.
back coloring. If we can use those broken crayons, really cause us to press more and allows for more force on the paper. So we're getting some strengthening there, but then we're
Hmm.
also intrinsically working on that grasp as well. And then it's motivating, it's fun, it's calming, it's engaging. You're working on some visual skills too, some pencil control. It is just really a lost art that I think every kid or teen could even get into.
I agree very much. You guys, are you tired of battling with handwriting frustrations while trying to get your child to focus on math? This blend of handwriting and math was one of the reasons my son struggled for several years. Then we started CTC Math, the math program designed to make learning accessible without the need for endless writing. With CTC Math, your child can work through interactive lessons and quizzes right on the app or computer. No more scribbling down answers or trying to keep up with the long worksheets or trying to even keep columns lined up for those long addition or long division problems. And the automated grading gives you immediate feedback on how they're doing. And the best part? Everything is digital. From lessons to assessments, CTC Math eliminates the struggle of handwriting so your child can focus on mastering math concepts at their own pace. So visit ctcmath.com today to start your free trial and give your child the freedom to focus on learning and not just on writing. That's right, that's ctcmath.com. It's math made simple, accessible, and fun for every learner. Now, back to the show. All right, Kelli, the other post that I see, it's almost every single September and October that there's this Facebook post that floats around of an x-ray of a child's hand, and it's stop worrying about handwriting. Your child's hand isn't developed until age 7 anyway. And everyone's, oh, wait, what do I do? Am I working on this? Am I not working on this? I'm getting mixed messages. I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Can you weigh in on this a little bit?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that one float around.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it is true. Yes, this is true as far as, yeah, their bones and their muscles and stuff are still developing. I take it as that means we're not going to have a 3-year-old write letters. That's not appropriate, right? But we can still have them working with letters. We can still have them learning letter sounds, learning letter names, building letters out of sticks or wiki sticks, or here's have those cute little wooden pieces. So there's letter play that's happening in those preschool years at a developmental level. And then again, going back to building up those foundational skills, developing those fine motor, gross motor, coordination, visual, all those pieces in order to be able to, when we get to kindergarten, really hit the ground running with developing some handwriting skills. I also think we have to remember too, kindergarten expectations have changed a lot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I talk parents through this because we're in a little bit of a catch-22 of, I know developmentally, maybe a student in kindergarten developmentally is not quote ready for certain skills, but if that school's expectation is for them to be able to do this, then they might need a little extra outside support and help the parent problem solve so that student can meet those expectations. So it's tricky. It's very tricky. But
now, within our homeschooling world, we do have a bit more flexibility within that. There is not the outside standards of learning that by the end of kindergarten, you must be able to do this type of thing. But we also don't just want to wait and wait and wait, recognizing like, my kid's not ready, my kid's not ready. Okay, that is fantastic. But how do we recognize when it is that you need to really start to seek help? And I think there is a range in there. So when you're saying a catch-22, I agree. There is totally what's the expectation and can you start to lean in and meet that? And if not, what do we do with it? So within the homeschooling world, what I tend to tell parents is you're right, you are the expert in your own child. And so you can start to really wait if you want to wait, but you can still play with letters and you can still practice these fine motor skills. You can still work on that visual scanning. There's ways to work on handwriting without handwriting. But there does come a time when we need to check and see what's going on in the brain and in the body. If this is going to forever be a struggle, or is this will be fine in a year or so? We don't, if without getting the proper supports or without asking and looking at other people or building your team, you can't really recognize and know that situation.
yeah, and I think that is spot on because that is the beauty of homeschool. That's probably why many people are doing that. But we know the research shows that early intervention does make all the difference. And if we can recognize some of these signs that there is a struggle, and we can definitely monitor and observe and watch for progress and watch for development. But at some point, we really need to consider how can we get that outside help as soon as possible? Because remediating a child at age 6 versus age 10 or 11 looks completely different.
Completely different.
It's not impossible at all. I am firmly a believer that we can remediate a student of any age to improve their handwriting. So it's never too late, but also that remediation looks a lot different. It's going to take a lot longer. You're working now with some ingrained habits. And so if we can catch them a little bit on that front end and give them some remediation and explicit instruction, etc., the outcome I think is going to be a lot better and easier for everybody.
So One of the other top questions that I get, and you just touched on this a little bit, of what about the 10 and 11 and 12-year-old who just is really struggling with handwriting? Do we even try it anymore? Because it's not like we're sitting and writing down papers. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I get this one a lot too.
Yeah.
So my favorite is when people are told they're in fourth grade, here's a computer, we don't need to
Yeah.
worry about handwriting anymore. They're not going to be able to improve. And again, that's just simply not true. Dr. Berninger has talked a lot about this in her research. Multiple research articles point to the fact of neuroplasticity. And so we know that we can train our bodies and our brains and our hands to improve no matter their age. What I like to think about, especially in that age group, is yes, let's remediate handwriting. Let's also accommodate at the same
Hmm.
time. It really
Hmm.
doesn't have to be an either or, it can be a both. And so
Yes.
maybe if they're working on a project and it requires a lot of writing, maybe they are doing a speech to text or typing, although caveat, typing is equally as hard as handwriting as far
Hmm.
as it's a bilateral coordination skill. There's visual skills to go along with that as well. So it's not necessarily a trade-off. But I think if we can do that remediation piece, accommodate them as well, and build both of those systems in, I think that's really going to get the best outcomes lifelong.
Yes. I also would, a really important thing to note within this is what kind of learner that your child is. And I'm not a proponent of you, there's only one way that they learn, like their kinesthetic or their auditory or whatever. That research has actually been quite debunked. However, if your child is a mover and a shaker and they frequently need to have this motor component to be able to focus and to keep their attention, then handwriting is going to be an important piece. That note taking as time goes on. I've watched this now with my son, who's now 13, who did not write for quite some time, but was always moving and moving every which way. He had a lot of visual components, and which impacted his handwriting, but needed to be moving all the time. And so we had to keep working on getting handwriting so that when it came time where he needed to be able to sit in class at our co-ops or sit through church service or he's a hockey player now, but they sit through film review. So he needs to be able to sit and do those things. Handwriting is his primary way of keeping his attention there. So if we had not continued to work on remediating that, even from age 10 and up, he'd be missing out on quite a bit at this point in time at age 13. So I'm with you, Kelli, on this, how important it is to work on both, that we want to accommodate and we want to remediate simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think anecdotally we can share that. And then also, again, going back to the research on brain stimulation is there. When
Mhm.
we are writing by hand, we are stimulating multiple senses in our body, multiple cognitive processes, language development. Like, all of these things are happening when we're writing by hand, improved retention of information. There have been links to improved reading and spelling through handwriting, as well as really cool. I think this study came out, it was either earlier this year or last year, about the fact that handwriting, particularly early handwriting instruction, actually impacts brain development, which,
Boom.
oh, like, yeah, when
Yeah.
I read that study, I'm like, okay, we think this, but like now we know that this is real. And so,
Yeah.
exactly, yes, it impacts their life skills and all of this, but when we're thinking about those types of skills too, it's wildly important. And another thing too, I think that handwriting sometimes gets on the back burner, right? We're so focused on reading often. And I get it. As a parent, that was the
Mhm.
first thing that I remediated with my own daughter. I'm like, oh my goodness, we've got to figure out this reading first with the dyslexia. And then we remediated the handwriting, but it's one and the same. It's the
Yeah.
opposite side of the coin. Reading is the decoding and writing is the encoding. And those are equal parts of literacy. And so if one is a challenge, or if we don't focus on one, it really plays into the other one as well. And
And
of course,
even if we're thinking about our children and moving into the future, we want them to be able to take in other people's information. And primarily we get that through reading, although video, obviously, and auditory through podcasts too. Keep listening, guys. But we still want them to be able to read and take in information that way. But we also want them to know their words are valuable. And so when they're putting them out through writing is one of the most important ways to make that happen.
Yep, it's a functional life skill that will serve them not only through academics, but really the rest of their life.
Through the rest of their life. Yeah. Kelli, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to actually ask Kelli to make sure that you send me some of those links that you were talking about of research so that we can make sure that they're here in the show notes for all of you other research nerds out there like me and Kelli.
Yeah. And I'll also share, I would love to, I know that so many of your listeners are homeschoolers. And so as we talked about earlier with those like expectations, I have a wonderful resource that's based on the research for what you actually can expect for each grade so that you can just make sure that your child's tracking. I think that's so wildly
Yes. Yes. Ooh, fantastic. That's awesome. We'll make sure that's also linked in the show notes. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so handwritingsolutions.org is our website. You'll find a ton of resources, including that developmental expectation. You'll find some freebies, over 80 blog posts. It's a wealth of information there. I would love to hear from your listeners. I offer free consultations, and they can also email me at kelli@handwritingsolutions.org. And then, of course, Instagram, Facebook, all of the usual places as well.
Love it. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all your knowledge on, yes, on the fine motor skills, but what and how can we work through that, but also some of the underlying why. Why are we even going to work on this and focus on it? It's always so enlightening and wonderful to be with you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week. Same time, same place.